Clara Bennett had buried her pride somewhere along the 50 miles of dust and heat between her father's shame and a stranger's front gate. She dismounted with her back straight and her jaw set, because she had promised herself she would not cry in front of a man who had every right to turn her away. She had not come to beg. She had come because someone had to, and her father could not lift his eyes off the floor long enough to face what he'd done. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The letter had been sitting on the kitchen table for 11 days. Clara knew because she had counted. She had watched her father walk past it every morning, pour his coffee, and look out the window at the dry creek bed as if the words on the page might rearrange themselves into something easier to face. They never did. The letter remained exactly what it was, a demand. Written in a steady, unhurried hand from a man named Caleb Whitmore, requesting repayment of $420 by the end of summer, or the return of the equipment he had lent in good faith the previous autumn. $420. To a man like Caleb Whitmore, that might have been a week's inconvenience. To her father, George Bennett, it was everything he did not have. Clara had read the letter twice herself, standing at the table, while her father pretended to be occupied with something outside. The handwriting was clean. The language was direct. There were no threats in it, no cruelty, no embellishments. That almost made it worse. A man who wrote a letter like that knew exactly what he was owed and had no need to shout about it. He simply expected it to be addressed. Her father had not addressed it. 11 days of silence. On the 12th morning, Clara sat down across from him at breakfast, folded her hands on the table and said, "Papa, we need to talk about the Whitmore letter." George Bennett did not look up from his coffee. He was 61 years old, and the summer had not been kind to him. His hands were rough and cracked from years of work that had never quite produced enough. His shoulders, once broad, had begun to carry a permanent curve to them, the posture of a man who had spent too many years apologizing for things that were not entirely his fault, and some that were. "There's nothing to talk about," he said. "There is," Clara said. "There's $420 worth of things to talk about." "I'll handle it." "How?" He set down his cup. He looked at the wall. "I'll figure something out." Clara looked at him for a long moment. She had loved her father her whole life, with the particular and stubborn love of a daughter who had watched him try and fail and try again, who had learned early that a man's intentions and his outcomes were not always the same thing. She did not love him any less for that, but she was 27 years old, and she had stopped pretending that love alone solved anything. "You borrowed equipment from a man who could have simply refused you," she said. "You signed a note. You agreed to terms. And now it's been 11 days since his letter arrived, and you haven't written a single word back to him." "I'm thinking." "Papa." Her voice was steady. She had worked to make it that way. "He is going to come here, or he is going to send someone, and when he does, it will be worse than if we had simply written back." George Bennett's jaw tightened. "I know what I did. Then let me go." He finally looked at her. Something passed across his face, not quite shame, but close to it. Something that lived in the same neighborhood as shame and knew it by name. "Clara, let me go to him. Let me explain that you intend to repay the debt, that you need time, and that you are sorry for the delay. That's all. That's what the letter is asking for, Papa. Not the money yet, just an answer." "I should be the one to go." "Yes," she said simply. "You should." The word landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. She did not soften it. She did not add anything to cushion the fall. He had raised her to be honest, and she was honoring that even when it cost something. He looked down at his hands. "I'll think about it," he said. He thought about it for 3 more days. On the 15th morning, Clara found a note on the kitchen table where the Whitmore letter used to sit. Her father's handwriting. Shaky and uneven, the way it always was when he was writing something that cost him. "Clara, I know I ought to go myself. I can't face the man. I'm asking you to do what I can't. Take the roan. Take the letter. Tell him I mean to pay every cent. Tell him I'm sorry." She read it twice. Then she folded it into her apron pocket, went to the barn, and saddled the roan. The ride to Caleb Whitmore's ranch took most of the morning. The road wound up through the foothills, climbing steadily away from the flat lowland where the town of Harlan sat baking in the July heat. Up here the air was different, thinner and sharper, laced with the smell of pine and dry grass, and the sky pressed down enormous and cloudless and blue, in a way that made a person feel very small, and also somehow accountable, as if the sky could see everything, and was not particularly impressed. Clara had ridden this way once before years ago with her father when she was a girl. She remembered the landscape more than she remembered the destination. The way the mountains held the light differently than the valley. The way sound carried up here farther and cleaner, like voices traveling across water. She did not remember Caleb Whitmore's property exactly, but she knew it by reputation, the way everyone in Harlan knew it. 400 acres. Good water. Better than most people said. A man who had built something real out here when plenty of others had tried and quit or died trying. They also said he kept to himself. They said he had a temper, though nobody could agree on what had provoked it or when. They said his wife had left him years ago, and that he had not sought another. Clara had spent the last 3 days quietly setting aside every piece of gossip she had absorbed about Caleb Whitmore, because she had found in her 27 years that gossip was mostly a portrait of the person telling it, not the person being described. She intended to form her own impression. When she came around the last bend in the trail and the ranch house came into view, she drew the roan to a slow walk and took one long breath. It was a working ranch. That much was immediately clear. Not the showpiece kind, not the kind built to impress, but solid, built right. The house was 2 stories, the wood weathered but well-maintained, the porch running the full length of the front. The barn behind it was large enough for a serious operation, and beyond that, she could see the slant of pasture fencing climbing the hill. There were horses. Good ones by the look of them, moving slow and unhurried in the summer heat. A man was fixing the gatepost at the edge of the yard. He didn't look up when she rode in, even though she knew he'd heard her. He had the practiced kind of stillness that people developed when they had spent a long time alone and were no longer startled by things approaching. He just kept working, driving the post, tamping the earth, and waited for her to announce herself. Clara rode up to a reasonable distance and stopped. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. He set down the post driver. He straightened. He turned. He was taller than she'd expected. Broad in the shoulders and lean everywhere else the way men got when their work was physical and constant. Dark hair worn a little long and a jaw that needed shaving. His eyes were the color of winter sky, not exactly gray and not exactly blue and not particularly warm. He looked at her the way a man looks at something unexpected. Not hostile, not welcoming, just assessing. "Miss," he said, "my name is Clara Bennett. I'm George Bennett's daughter. I'm here about the letter." Something shifted in his expression, not softening, rearranging. He looked at the roan. He looked at the saddlebags. He looked at her. "George Bennett sent his daughter," he said. Not a question. More like a man reading something out loud to make sure he had understood it correctly. "My father asked me to come," she said. "He sends his apologies for the delay in responding, and he wanted you to know that he intends to repay every dollar of the debt. He is requesting additional time." Caleb Whitmore said nothing for a moment. The wind moved through the pines at the edge of the property. Somewhere in the barn, a horse shifted and stamped. "That's what he sent you out here to say," Caleb said. "Yes, sir." 50 miles. 48, she said. I measured. His mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile. It wasn't quite not one either. "He couldn't come himself," Caleb said. It wasn't a question. It had the flatness of a man who already knew the answer and was not in the habit of pretending otherwise. Clara looked at him steadily. She had rehearsed this moment. She had thought about how to frame it, how to present her father in the most dignified light possible while still being honest. She had considered a dozen different ways to soften it, and then she said the true thing. "He was ashamed," she said. "He couldn't face you. I'm not here to excuse that. I'm here because someone needed to come, and it wasn't going to be him." Caleb Whitmore looked at her for a long moment. "You think that's fair to you?" he asked. "What I think doesn't change what is," she said. "I'm here. You're here. My father owes you money and an apology. The apology I can deliver. The money will take time." He studied her face. Whatever he was looking for, she didn't know. But she didn't look away. She had ridden 48 miles through July heat to stand in front of this man and speak plainly, and she intended to finish what she'd started. "Come inside," he said finally. "You and that horse both look like you could use water." The inside of the house was clean, in the way things were clean when someone maintained them out of habit rather than expectation of company. Functional. The kitchen held the smell of coffee and wood smoke, and faintly something that might have been baked earlier in the day. There was a table with 4 chairs, though Clara suspected only one of them saw regular use. She sat where he gestured. He poured water from a pitcher and set a glass in front of her, and one across from her, and sat down. "How old are you?" he asked. 27. "And you rode out here alone?" "I did." "Your father allowed that?" "My father wrote me a note and asked me to come. Whether he considered the specifics of the journey I can't say." Caleb wrapped both hands around his water glass and looked at the table. He had the look of a man who was recalculating something running numbers that had no clear arithmetic. "What does your father do?" he asked. "He farms, corn mostly, and some winter wheat. He had a good year 3 years back, and a difficult year last year, and a worse one this year. He borrowed your equipment in October because his own planter broke and he couldn't afford to replace it, and he thought the spring planting would give him enough to settle the debt before summer." She paused. "It didn't." "Why not?" "Dry spring. The creek ran lower than anyone expected. He lost about a third of the crop." Caleb nodded slowly. He was listening the way people listened when they were actually taking in what was said, not simply waiting for a pause so they could respond. "He could have written," Caleb said. "Yes." "He could have sent word any time in the last 11 days. "Yes." "Instead, he sent you." "Yes." Clara met his eyes. "I know. Believe me, I know." Something moved behind his expression again. Harder to read this time. "You're not here to defend him," Caleb said slowly. "I'm here to represent him," she said. "That's not the same thing." He looked at her for a long, still moment. Then he stood, walked to the kitchen counter, and came back with a plate of biscuits, left over from that morning, by the look of them. He set the plate between them without comment, as if feeding a person who had ridden 48 miles in July heat was simply the obvious next thing to do. "Eat something," he said. She did. They talked for the better part of an hour. It was not the conversation Clara had prepared for. She had prepared for negotiation for a harder version of it, the kind where a man reminded you of exactly what you owed and waited to see what you'd offer in return. She had prepared for coldness, for impatience, for the barely concealed contempt that some men displayed toward anyone who arrived in a position of disadvantage. Caleb Whitmore was not cold. He was careful. There was a difference. He asked questions. About the farm. About the soil composition near the creek. About what her father had planted and in what rotation. He asked about the planter that had broken and what exactly had failed in it. And when she told him a cracked drive shaft, her father had tried to repair it twice with wire before giving up. He nodded and said something about cast iron and summer heat that suggested he'd had the same problem himself once. He did not ask about her. Not directly. But she noticed that he listened to the spaces around what she said, the things she didn't say with the same attention he gave to what she did. When the hour was done, he stood and said, "I'll walk you back to your horse." She stood as well. "You haven't given me an answer about the debt." "No," he said. "I haven't." "Mr. Whitmore." "Caleb," he said. Not warmly, just correcting. She stopped. "Caleb, I need to bring something back to my father. Some indication of how you intend to proceed." He paused at the kitchen doorway and turned to look at her. "You rode 48 miles. You're not riding back tonight." Clara blinked. "I beg your pardon. It's past noon." By the time you get back to the main road, it'll be dusk, and that trail after dark isn't safe, especially alone." He said it matter-of-factly, the way he seemed to say everything. "There's a spare room. It's clean. You're welcome to it." She felt the precise weight of the offer and what it did and did not mean. "That's a generous offer," she said carefully. "But I don't think it's appropriate for me to—" "My niece is here," he said. "She's 8. I've been keeping her since March." He turned and walked toward the door. "I'll introduce you." The girl's name was Lily. She was small for 8, with dark hair that fell in a loose braid over one shoulder, and eyes that were her uncle's, that same winter sky color, but with considerably more life in them. She was sitting on the porch steps. When they came out, a book open on her knees, and she looked up at Clara with the frank and immediate curiosity of a child who had not yet learned to be suspicious of strangers. "This is Miss Bennet," Caleb said. "She's going to stay tonight." "Hello," Lily said. Then to Clara, "Do you know how to braid hair? Uncle Caleb tried 3 times, and he says it looks like a rope fight." Clara looked at the braid in question. "I think he was being a little hard on himself," she said. "But yes, I know how to braid hair." Lily beamed. Caleb made a sound that was not quite a cough. That evening, Clara helped Lily with her braid, and then Lily showed her the garden, a struggling, earnest little plot behind the house where someone had planted tomatoes and beans and, mysteriously, a single sunflower that had achieved a height considerably beyond what anyone had apparently expected. "Uncle Caleb planted it," Lily said, pointing at the sunflower. "He said it was supposed to be small. He doesn't know why it's like that. Some things just grow the way they're going to grow," Clara said. "That's what he said, too." Lily considered this. "Are you going to stay longer than tonight?" "I don't think so." "Why not?" "Because I have a home to get back to." Lily thought about this. "Uncle Caleb has a home, but he doesn't really have anyone in it. Just me, and I came in March." Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing and bent to examine a tomato plant that needed tying up. Dinner was simple and sufficient: beans and cornbread and dried venison that Caleb had clearly prepared without fanfare and without apology for its simplicity. He set the table with the same quiet efficiency he seemed to bring to everything. 3 places. 3 cups. A small jar of preserves that Lily requested with the negotiating tone of someone who knew the odds and was prepared to advocate anyway. Caleb put the preserves on the table without comment. They ate. It was strange. Clara thought how ordinary it felt. Sitting at a stranger's table in a house she'd ridden 48 miles to reach, eating dinner, like a person who had always sat there. Lily talked about her book about a horse named Captain, who had a bad habit of pushing through the gate, about a girl in Harlan named Dottie, who had supposedly seen a black bear, but whose reliability Lily had serious reservations about. Caleb listened to his niece the way Clara had noticed he listened to everything. Fully. Without looking somewhere else. Once his eyes crossed the table and met Clara's. She looked down at her beans. "My sister died in March," he said when Lily had gone upstairs. He said it simply the way he said most things. "Fever. She was in town. She'd been staying with her husband's family over winter. By the time word reached me, it was done." Clara set down her fork. "I'm sorry." "Her husband wasn't in a position to keep Lily," he continued, "so I came and got her." He wrapped a hand around his coffee cup. "I don't say this for sympathy. I say it because you're wondering why a man living alone out here has an 8-year-old, and I'd rather explain it than have you drawing your own conclusions." "I wasn't drawing conclusions," she said. "Most people do." "I'm not most people." He looked at her across the table. No, he said after a moment. "I don't suppose you are." Duh. She was lying on the cot in the spare room, fully dressed, looking at the ceiling, when she heard him on the porch. She could tell by the sound, the particular creak of the boards, the stillness between the sounds, that he was sitting out there, the way men sat on porches at night when they were thinking about something they hadn't solved yet. She had the very clear sense that she was at least in part what he was thinking about. Not her specifically, maybe, but what she represented. The debt. The negotiation still hanging unfinished between them. The question of what came next. She thought about her father sitting at home, waiting for her to return with an answer. She thought about the way Caleb Whitmore had said, "No, I don't suppose you are." She thought about Lily's braid, and the struggling tomatoes, and the inexplicable sunflower. She lay there in the dark, and listened to the pines moving outside, and the distant sound of horses, and she thought, whatever this man decides to say tomorrow, I will listen to it. And then I will ride home. And then I will figure out what comes next. She had not come here expecting anything. She had not come here for herself at all. But she was very aware, lying in the dark in Caleb Whitmore's spare room, that she had not felt this awake, this particular sharp kind of awake, in a very long time. In the morning he was at the stove when she came down. He handed her a cup of coffee without being asked, and said without turning around, "I've been thinking about the debt." "So have I," she said. "I'm not going to call it in," he said. Clara set down the cup. "Mr. Whitmore, Caleb." "Caleb." She stopped. "That's not what I came here for. My father intends to repay you. Your father can repay me when he can." He turned then and looked at her with those level winter sky eyes. "What I'm going to say next is something you're free to refuse, and I mean that plainly. No consequence either way." She waited. "I need help," he said. "Not charity work, real help. Someone who can manage this house and help with Lily. The schooling, the day-to-day things I'm not equipped for. I'm not home enough during the day. I'm working the ranch and she's alone too many hours." He paused. "I'm offering a position. Room board, a wage, 3 months. If your father can settle part of the debt in that time, we can renegotiate the rest." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "That's not a simple offer," she said. "No," he said. "It isn't. You don't know me. I don't know you. I know you rode 48 miles alone to deliver a truth your father couldn't say himself," he said. "I know you tied up my niece's hair and listened to her talk about bears for 20 minutes without looking like you wanted to be somewhere else. I know you didn't exaggerate your father's situation, and you didn't beg." He looked at her steadily. "That's enough to go on." Clara picked up her coffee cup. She thought about her father's note on the kitchen table. She thought about the debt. She thought about Lily's sunflower taller than it had any right to be growing in a direction nobody had planned for. 3 months, she said. 3 months, he said. "I'll need to go home first, tell my father, arrange things." "Of course. And I want it understood." She held his gaze. "I'm not here to settle a debt. I'm not here because you're offering charity. I'm here because it's work, and I'll do it well. And at the end of 3 months, we will both have honored the arrangement and nothing beyond it. Is that clear?" Caleb Whitmore looked at her for a long, still moment. "Yes, ma'am," he said. And for the first time since she'd ridden through his gate, something in his expression shifted not into warmth exactly, but into something that had the same effect. Something quiet and genuine, like a door that had been closed for a very long time, opening just enough to let in the light. Clara looked down at her coffee. Outside, Lily's boots hit the stairs. The summer morning was already turning warm, and Clara Bennett, who had ridden 48 miles to deliver someone else's apology, found herself sitting at a stranger's table with a cup of coffee, and the very distinct sense that something she had not planned for had already begun. She rode home with the offer sitting in her chest, like something that had not yet decided what it was. The roan moved steady beneath her, and Clara let the animal find its own pace, while she turned the morning over in her mind. 3 months. A wage. Room and board. A man who had looked at her across a breakfast table and said, "That's enough to go on." As if the thing most people spent years performing trustworthiness was simply something he'd already clocked and filed away. She wasn't sure whether that steadied her or unsettled her more. By the time she rode into Harlan, the afternoon heat had settled into the kind of weight that made the whole town look like it was leaning slightly. She put the roan up at the livery and walked home, and she found her father where she had left him at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup that had been cold for hours. He looked up when she came in. His eyes went straight to her face, reading it the way old men read weather. "Well," he said. "He's not calling in the debt," Clara said. She set her riding gloves on the counter and turned to face him. "Not yet. He's offered me a position. 3 months of work keeping house, helping with his niece. In exchange, he'll hold the note and we negotiate the balance at the end of it. Her father was quiet for a long moment. His niece, he said. She's 8. Her mother died in March. He's been keeping her alone. George Bennett set down his cup. He looked at the table. Then he looked at Clara with something that had too many things mixed into it to be any one emotion cleanly. That's not right, he said. Sending you to work off my debt. He offered Papa. I accepted. She kept her voice even. And I accepted because it's work, not because I'm working off anything. He was clear about that. I was clear about that. Clara, if you had gone yourself, she said quietly, we would not be having this conversation. That landed where she meant it to. Her father looked down. She did not press it. She had said what needed saying, and there was no satisfaction in it, only the hard, clean feeling of a thing correctly done. I'll be leaving in 2 days, she said. I'll need to pack properly. And I need you to write him a letter. A real one this time, not me carrying your words. Your handwriting. Your name. I was silent for a moment. I'll write it, he said. Tonight, she said. He looked up at her. And then, slowly, he nodded. That night, she heard him at the table long after she'd gone to her room. The scratch of pen on paper. Stopping. Starting again. She lay in the dark and listened to it, and she thought about a man on a porch in the mountains who had sat up thinking about things he hadn't solved yet, and she understood in some quiet way that the 2 nights were not entirely different. She arrived back at the Whitmore Ranch on a Thursday with a saddlebag packed for 3 months and her father's letter in her coat pocket. Lily met her at the gate. Not Caleb. Lily barreling down the porch steps with her braid already coming loose. It had been 2 days. Whatever Caleb had attempted had not held, and her face open with the specific delight of a child who has been hoping for something and is watching it arrive. You came back, Lily said. I said I would, Clara told her. Uncle Caleb said people don't always do what they say. He's right, Clara said, swinging down from the roan. But I did. Lily grabbed her saddlebag with both hands before Clara could stop her. I'll carry it. Uncle Caleb's fixing the water pump by the barn. He said to tell you if you came that the room is ready and there's lunch on the stove. Clara looked at the barn. She could hear the clang of metal from that direction, steady and purposeful, the sound of a man working through a problem. Let's go tell him I'm here, she said. He knows, Lily said confidently. He heard the horse. He did know. He came out of the barn door before they were halfway across the yard, wiping his hands on a cloth, and he stopped when he saw them and simply looked at her for a moment, in that way he had taking inventory, without commentary. Miss Bennett, he said. Clara, she said. If we're going to be in the same house for 3 months. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Clara, he said. The pump's broken, she asked. Seals worn through. I'll have it done by evening. He tucked the cloth into his belt. Lily, show you the room. Not yet. It's the same one as before. There's space in the wardrobe. He looked at Lily. Don't you have beans to shell? Lily made a face of theatrical suffering, but went. Clara watched her go and felt something loosen slightly in her chest. Not tension releasing exactly, more like the particular sense of a place becoming slightly less unfamiliar, the way a house started to feel less foreign once you'd slept in it once. She talks about you, Caleb said without preamble. Clara looked at him. Since you left, he said. She's been talking about whether you'd come back. He said it flatly, not to soften it or dress it up, just reporting. I want you to know that because she's already attached, and I should have thought more carefully about that before I made the offer. If at any point the 3 months becomes, I'm here, Clara said. I said I'd come and I came. I don't plan to leave in the middle of something. He held her gaze for a moment. All right, he said. All right, she said. He went back to the pump. She went to find her room and the beans and Lily. The first week went by in the way that first weeks went, uncertain and slightly formal, everyone moving around each other with the careful consideration of people who had not yet mapped the other person's edges. Clara cooked. She cleaned. She worked beside Lily in the garden and helped with the schooling. Lily was bright and easily bored, which meant she needed to be kept challenged, or she simply tuned out and stared at the window, and Clara understood that well enough to respect it. They worked through arithmetic in the morning and reading in the afternoon and in between. Lily told her about Captain the Gatecrasher horse in such comprehensive and loving detail that Clara felt she could identify him by personality alone without ever seeing him. Caleb was in early and out before full light. He worked the ranch with 2 hired hands, a pair of brothers named Ed and Roy Marsh, who came in 6 days a week and didn't talk much, which seemed to suit everyone. He came in lunch, when he came in at all. He came in for dinner reliably, because of Lily. Clara had understood that quickly. Whatever else he did or didn't do, he made sure he was at that table when Lily ate dinner. He thanked her for the meals. Every evening. Not effusively, just a quiet, direct acknowledgement. Good dinner. Thank you. Or sometimes just thank you, Clara. As if her name were itself a complete sentence. By the end of the first week, she had learned 3 things about Caleb Whitmore. He did not sleep enough. She could hear him sometimes in the early hours, movement below the sound of the back door boots on the porch. He wasn't restless the way anxious people were restless. It was more like a man who had too many things requiring his attention and not enough hours to give them. He had fixed the water pump, the gate hinge, a cracked board on the porch, and a section of fence at the north pasture, all in the span of 5 days, and none of it he had mentioned. She'd noticed the things because she was observant, not because he'd said anything. And third, he watched Lily the way a man watched something he was afraid of losing. Quietly from across the room, with a steadiness that cost him something. Lily was too young to see it. Clara was not. It was on a Tuesday toward the end of that first week that she found Lily crying in the garden. Not loudly, just sitting between the tomato rows with her knees pulled up and her face turned toward the dirt, her shoulders doing the small, hopeless shaking of a child who had been trying to stop for a while and hadn't managed it. Clara sat down beside her in the dirt, without asking which she judged was the right thing to do. She did not say what's wrong or don't cry or any of the things adults said when they were more uncomfortable with tears than the person who was having them. She sat. After a moment, Lily said, "I had a dream about my mama." Clara didn't say anything. She was just in the kitchen. Lily continued in the halting way of grief too big for a small voice. "Making biscuits. And then I woke up, and I knew she wasn't." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "And Uncle Caleb doesn't know how to talk about her. He gets a look like it hurts, and then he says something about chores." Clara felt the truth of that settle in her chest. She thought about the way Caleb had told her about his sister plainly, quickly, like a fact he needed to transmit before it cost him too much to say it. "Some people," Clara said slowly, "love so hard that the grief from losing someone is almost the same size as the person was. And when it's that big, they don't know how to hold it and talk at the same time." Lily looked at her. "Is that what Uncle Caleb does?" "I think so. But doesn't he know I miss her too?" "He knows," Clara said. "He's just scared that if he opens that up, he won't be able to be strong enough for you. And he thinks being strong for you is the most important thing." Lily thought about this. "That's dumb," she said finally. Clara almost smiled. "Yes," she said. "It kind of is." Lily leaned against her arm. Clara let her. They sat in the dirt between the tomato rows for a good while longer, and Clara thought about grief and the ridiculous shapes people bent themselves into trying to carry it, and she thought about an 8-year-old girl who had lost her mother and landed in the care of a man who loved her fiercely and silently and imperfectly, and she thought somebody needs to teach them how to talk to each other. She did not yet know it would be her. That evening she told Caleb what had happened. She told him at the table after Lily had gone upstairs the same way he had told her about his sister, plainly without embellishment, because it needed to be said. He sat with it. She watched him absorb it and saw exactly what Lily had described. The look that moved across his face like a shadow tight and contained the instinct to close it off, warring with something else. "She didn't tell me," he said. "She didn't want to upset you. She's 8 years old. She shouldn't have to—" He stopped. His jaw tightened. "I should have—" "You can't know what she doesn't say," Clara said. "But now you know. That's what matters." He was quiet for a long time. "I don't know how to talk about Martha," he said finally. Martha. His sister's name for the first time spoken aloud. "Every time I try it comes out wrong. Or it doesn't come out at all." "It doesn't have to come out right," Clara said. "It just has to come out." He looked at her across the table. "You make that sound simple." "I know it isn't," she said. "I'm just telling you what works." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Your mother, is she—" "She died when I was 12, Clara said. "Same thing, I imagine. Fever, winter." He went still. "I'm sorry," he said. And he said it differently than people usually said it, not as a social reflex, but as something he actually meant, arriving a beat later than the automatic version would have. "It was a long time ago," she said. "But I remember being Lily's age and wishing someone would just sit in the room with me and not try to fix it." She paused. "You don't have to fix it, Caleb. You just have to stay." He looked at her. The lamp between them was burning low. "I don't leave," he said. The words came out quiet and certain, like something load-bearing. "Whatever else I am, I don't leave." Clara believed him. She was not entirely sure when that had happened, at what exact point she had crossed from cautious assessment into something that felt like bedrock trust. But she believed him, and she did not try to talk herself out of it. "I know," she said. The following Sunday, she came out to the kitchen early to find Caleb already at the table with Lily, who was telling him something with enormous seriousness in both hands. Caleb was listening the way he listened, fully without interruption, and he said something that made Lily laugh, a short, delighted laugh that ricocheted around the kitchen and died in the corners. Clara stopped in the doorway. Lily saw her first. "Clara, Uncle Caleb told me about Mama's biscuits. He said she used to burn the bottoms every single time and pretend they were supposed to be like that." Clara looked at Caleb. His face was still carrying the story, something soft and unguarded there that she suspected he had not intended her to see. She did not say anything about it. She went to the stove and started the coffee and said, "I burn the bottom sometimes too. I call it caramelized." Lily thought this was the finest thing she'd ever heard. Caleb's voice behind her, "Martha would have liked you." Clara did not turn around. She kept her hands on the coffee pot. "That's a kind thing to say," she said. "It's a true thing," he said. And then he pushed back from the table and said something to Lily about Captain needing his morning feed, and the two of them went out the back door, and Clara stood at the stove with the coffee heating, and her heart doing something it had no particular authorization to do. She told it firmly to stop. It did not stop. The second week brought visitors. On Wednesday morning, Clara was in the garden when she heard horses on the road, and she looked up to see two riders coming in through the gate, a man she didn't know, and a woman beside him, both well-dressed in the pointed, deliberate way of people who wanted you to know they were well-dressed. Caleb came out of the barn. "Hargrove," he said. His voice had gone flat in a way Clara had not heard before. The man dismounted. He was somewhere in his 50s, heavy-set, with the kind of confident ease that came from having spent a long time being the largest financial presence in any room. He smiled at Caleb the way you smiled at someone you were about to negotiate with. "Whitmore," he said. "Been a while." "Has been," Caleb said. He did not extend his hand. "Heard you had some company out here." The man's eyes moved past Caleb to Clara, who had stood up from the garden and was watching without pretending she wasn't. "New housekeeper." "Miss Bennett works for me," Caleb said. His tone made it clear this was all the information on offer. "The woman. Mrs. Hargrove." Clara assumed, looked at Clara with the particular expression of someone performing a social assessment and handing down a verdict simultaneously. She offered a small, practiced smile that stopped well short of her eyes. "How lovely," she said in a tone that meant nothing of the sort. Hargrove had already moved on. "I'll get to the point, Caleb. I'm buying up the east section of the valley. I've got 3 sellers signed already. Yours would complete the corridor I need." He said it the way men said things they expected would simply happen. I'm prepared to make a very good offer. Not interested, Caleb said. You haven't heard the number. Doesn't matter. Hargrove's smile held. This land's been hard on you since Margaret left. No disrespect. But a man alone on 400 acres, there's an argument for simplifying. Clara watched Caleb's face. Nothing moved in it. My personal situation, Caleb said, is not a factor in this conversation. I'm just saying. I heard what you said. Caleb looked at him steadily. The answer is no, Hargrove. It's been no every time you've asked, and it's no today. You're welcome to water your horses and rest before the ride back. Hargrove was quiet for a moment. Something shifted behind his expression, the smile staying in place while the friendliness drained out of it. Think about it, he said. My offer won't be on the table forever. I know, Caleb said. That's fine. Hargrove looked at him for another moment. Then he looked at Clara again, and there was something in that look she did not like, an assessment of a different kind, calculating in a way that had nothing to do with land. Then he remounted, said something to his wife, and they rode back out the gate. Clara stood in the garden. After a moment she said, Who is he? Caleb turned. Fletcher Hargrove. He owns the mill and half the commercial property in Harlan. He paused. He's been trying to buy this section for 2 years. For the corridor, she said. He says. His jaw was set. The 3 he mentioned. Those are families that have been on that land for 20 years. Good people. They sold because he made it very difficult not to. Clara looked at the road where the riders had gone. Difficult how? She asked. Caleb met her eyes. That's a longer conversation, he said, but you'll want to know it. He told her that evening on the porch after Lily was in bed. He told her about the water rights dispute that had started 18 months ago. Hargrove quietly buying up the upstream claim on the creek that fed the East Valley. About the families who had found their irrigation suddenly complicated their wells running low in dry months. About the 2 men who had gone to the county office to file complaints and found mysteriously that the paperwork never arrived. About the family, the Deacons, who had held out longest and had their barn catch fire in April, origin undetermined. Clara listened without interrupting. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. He hasn't moved against you, she said. Not yet, Caleb said. My water source is different. I'm higher up. I've got my own spring. He can't touch that. But if he gets the land corridor he wants, he controls the road access to the whole northeast section, including this ranch. He looked out at the dark. I'm the last piece. So if you sell, he wins. If I sell, he wins, and 15 families lose access to the market road. Their cattle, their grain, it all moves through that corridor. He paused. I won't sell. Clara looked at his profile in the low light, the set of his jaw, the absolute absence of theater in it. Does anyone know, she asked, about the water rights, the barn, all of it? Some people know some of it, he said. Nobody knows all of it. Why not? He was quiet for a moment. Because I've been handling it alone, he said. Same way I handle everything. Clara looked at him. That has to stop, she said. He turned to look at her. The families in the valley, she said. They don't know what Hargrove is doing to all of them because none of them have talked to each other. He's counting on that. He's counting on everyone thinking their problem is just their problem. She paused. Is there anyone in town you trust? A few. Then we need to bring them together. He looked at her for a long moment. We, he said. Yes, she said. We. He did not argue. He did not say it's not your problem or you don't need to be involved. He just looked at her the way he sometimes did, taking accurate measure, and then he said, There's a man named Tanner. He's got the grain store on Main. He knows more about what Hargrove's done to the valley than anyone. Can you get him out here? Clara asked. I can. Then do it. She stood. And Caleb. She looked at him before she went inside. What you said the other night, that you don't leave. She held his gaze. Neither do I. Something moved in his face. Not the usual careful rearrangement. Something more unguarded than that. Something that looked like a man recognizing a thing he had not known he was waiting to hear. "Good night, Clara," he said. "Good night," she said. She went inside. Behind her, he stayed on the porch for a long time. The following Saturday, Tanner came. He was a compact man, 60s, with the alert eyes of someone who had spent 40 years watching a community breathe in and out and knew exactly where it was healthy and where it was sick. He sat at the kitchen table with coffee and looked between Caleb and Clara and said, "You're the Bennett girl, George's daughter." "Yes," Clara said. "I heard you were out here." He looked at her appraisingly. "George is a good man who makes bad decisions." "I know," Clara said. "I'm his daughter." Tanner's mouth went sideways in something that was almost a smile. He looked at Caleb. "What are we doing here, Whitmore?" Caleb told him. "All of it. The water rights, the road corridor, the families." He spoke in the same direct unhurry. He did everything, laying out the facts without drama, letting the weight of them do the work. Tanner listened with his hands flat on the table and his face very still, the way men listened when they were putting things together that they'd been suspecting for a while. When Caleb finished, Tanner said, "Hargrove's smarter than most people give him credit for." "Yes," Caleb said. "And meaner." "Yes." Tanner looked at Clara. "Whose idea was this bringing me in?" "Mine," Clara said. "Why?" "Because Caleb's been fighting this alone, and Hargrove's counting on that. Because those families think their problems are separate, and they're not. And because if we don't put the whole picture together and show it to people who can act on it, Hargrove is going to get his corridor, and 15 families are going to lose everything by spring." Tanner studied her. "You've been out here 2 weeks." "Yes." "And you figured all this out?" "Caleb told me the pieces," she said. "I just put them in order." Tanner looked at Caleb. "She always liked this." Caleb looked at Clara. Something warm and careful in it, the way he'd look at a lamp in a dark room. "Yes," he said. "She is." Tanner set down his cup. "All right," he said. "I know 5 families who'll listen. I know a circuit judge who's been looking for a reason to look at Hargrove's water claim filings for 6 months." He leaned forward. "But if we're going to do this, we do it right. We don't move until we have everything documented. Every transaction, every filing, every family who's willing to testify." He looked at Clara. "That's going to take time, and someone with patience and a good head to organize it." Clara met his eyes. "I have 3 months," she said. Tanner nodded slowly. "Then let's get to work." Caleb walked Tanner out when he left, and Clara stood at the kitchen window and watched them talk at the gate, easy low. The conversation of 2 men who had known each other long enough to drop the formal phrasing. Lily came and stood beside her. "Are they fixing it?" Lily asked. Clara looked down at her. "Trying to. Uncle Caleb's been worried," Lily said matter-of-factly. "He thinks I don't notice, but I do. He gets real quiet in the evenings when he's worried. Quieter than regular quiet." "I know," Clara said. Lily leaned against the window frame. "He's not as quiet since you came," she said. Then casually, as only a child could manage, "I think he likes you." Clara kept her eyes on the gate. "I think he respects me," she said carefully. "That's not the same thing." Lily thought about this. Can it be both? Clara did not answer that. Outside, Caleb turned away from the gate and walked back toward the house, and when he looked up and saw her at the window, he did not look away. He just looked the way he sometimes did, like a man who had been alone a very long time and was only now beginning to understand the specific quality of that aloneness. Clara moved away from the window. Her heart did the thing again. She told it again firmly to stop. It did not. Tanner moved fast once he had a direction. Within 3 days of that Saturday meeting, he had spoken quietly to 4 of the 5 families he'd mentioned: the Carvers, the Holts, the Pruitts, and old widow Sella Marsh, who had nothing left to lose, and said so plainly when Tanner sat down at her kitchen table. The 5th family, the Reeds, had already packed and left for Kansas the week prior. Tanner reported this without sentiment, But Clara saw what it did to Caleb's face, a brief involuntary tightening like a man absorbing a blow he'd been expecting, but had hoped wouldn't land. "We're running out of time," Caleb said that evening. "We have what we need to start," Clara said. "We don't have everything yet, but we have enough to build on." She had spent the last 3 days at the kitchen table with paper and ink organizing everything Tanner had brought her into something legible. Every family's account. Every date a complaint had been filed and gone unanswered. The water claim numbers. Tanner had pulled from the county record copies he'd kept. Something Hargrove had apparently not anticipated, that Tanner was the kind of man who kept copies of everything as a matter of habit. The timeline of purchases. The pattern of who sold when and what preceded each sale. Written out plainly, it was damning. It was also, she knew, not yet enough. "What we need," she told Caleb, "is the original water rights filing, the one Hargrove submitted 18 months ago. If Tanner's copies show what I think they show, there are dates that don't match. Hargrove backdated something. But we need the original document from the county office to prove it." Caleb was quiet. "Someone in that office is working with him," he said. "Yes," she said. "Which means we can't go through the front door." He looked at her. "What are you thinking?" he said. "I'm thinking," she said carefully, "that Tanner said the circuit judge has been looking for a reason. A federal judge doesn't need the county office. He can subpoena the original filings directly." She paused. "Does Tanner know how to reach him?" "He does," Caleb said slowly. "But that judge isn't due back in this circuit until the end of August." Clara looked at him. "Then we have 5 weeks to make sure that when he arrives, we hand him something he cannot ignore." Caleb looked at the papers on the table. He looked at her. And then he said something he had not said to her before, something that came out with the particular weight of a man who did not say it easily. "I don't know how you do that," he said. She looked up. "Do what?" "Take something that feels like a wall," he said, "and find the door in it." Clara held his gaze for a moment. Something moved through her that she did not immediately have a name for, warm and quiet and slightly dangerous. "I grew up with a father who ran into walls," she said. "I learned early that standing in front of them and being angry didn't move them." She looked back at the papers. "You have to find the door." He was quiet for a long moment. "Your father," he said. "He doesn't deserve you." "He's my father," she said simply. "Deserving doesn't come into it." The door, when it came, did not come from the direction she'd expected. It came from Lily. On a Wednesday morning, 10 days after Tanner's visit, Lily came running in from the yard with her braid flying half undone, and her face lit with the particular energy of a child carrying news she doesn't fully understand but knows is significant. "There's a man at the gate," she said breathless. "He asked if this is the Whitmore Ranch, and I said yes, and he said he has a letter for Uncle Caleb, and he won't give it to me because it's official." Caleb was across the yard and back in under 3 minutes. He came into the kitchen with a sealed envelope and a face that had gone very still. He opened it at the table, read it once, and then set it down and looked at Clara. "Hargrove's moved his timeline up," he said. She crossed to the table and read the letter. It was from a land office in the county seat. Formal, bureaucratic, carefully worded in the way documents were carefully worded when they were designed to appear procedural while doing something else entirely. It informed Caleb Whitmore that a review of property boundary surveys in the northeast section of the valley had identified a potential discrepancy in the recorded eastern boundary of the Whitmore Ranch, and that a surveyor would be arriving within 30 days to conduct a reassessment. Clara read it twice. "There's no discrepancy," Caleb said. His voice was flat and certain. "No," she said. "There isn't. This is how he moves the last piece." She set the letter down. "If he can get a survey that redraw the boundary even by a quarter mile, he can challenge the property claim. Tie it up in county proceedings long enough that you either sell or spend everything you have fighting it." "I've got the original survey," Caleb said. "It's in the deed box." "I know, but if the county office is working with him, then the original survey disappears," he said, "or gets amended." She looked at him. "Where's the deed box?" He went and got it. They went through it together at the table: deed surveys, land certificates, A handwritten note from the man who had sold Caleb the property 10 years ago. The original survey was there, dated, signed, sealed. "We need to get this to Tanner," Clara said. "Tonight. And Tanner needs to send a copy to the judge's office by the week's end. Not wait for August. Now." She looked at Caleb. "This is Hargrove moving. He knows something is shifting. Maybe someone told him Tanner's been talking to families, maybe he just got impatient. But this letter is him trying to set the board before we can." Caleb picked up the survey document and held it for a moment. "If I ride to Tanner tonight," he said, "I won't be back until morning." "Then go tonight," Clara said. He looked at her. "You'll be here, alone, with Lily." "I've been alone in worse situations," she said. "And Ed and Roy are in the bunkhouse." He was still looking at her. "Caleb," she said. "Go." He went. How was back before dawn, the way he'd promised, the sound of the horse in the yard, coming just as the sky was beginning its slow gray shift toward morning. Clara was already in the kitchen with the stove going because she had not slept more than 2 hours and had given up pretending around 3 in the morning. He came in the back door and stopped when he saw her. "You didn't sleep," he said. "I slept some," she said, which was close enough to true that she didn't feel the need to elaborate. He sat down at the table. He looked tired, not the bone-deep tired of a man defeated, but the sharp tired of someone who had been moving fast through the dark and was now holding very still. "Tanner's sending everything to the judge's office by Friday," he said. "He has a contact, a deputy clerk, who owes him. The filing goes in as a formal complaint against the county surveyor's office citing conflict of interest. It triggers a federal review." He paused. "It's not guaranteed, but it puts the judge on notice before he arrives. Makes it harder for Hargrove to run his play if there's already a federal eye on the county office." "That's good," Clara said. She put a cup of coffee in front of him. He wrapped both hands around it. He didn't drink it immediately. He just held it the way he sometimes held his coffee, like the warmth itself was the point. "Tanner said something," he said. Clara sat down across from him. "He said the families are talking about coming together. Meeting here if I'll allow it. Putting their accounts on record together in one place." He looked up. "He said it was your idea." "I suggested it," she said. "You'd have to agree." "Of course I agree," he said. "I'm just—" He stopped. He looked at the table. "I've been fighting this alone for 2 years," he said. "I didn't ask anyone for help because I didn't think—" He paused. "I didn't think anyone would." Clara looked at him steadily. "Understand what they're part of," she said. "You've been keeping the whole picture in your own head. Nobody could see it." She paused. "Let them see it." He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression had shifted from the careful, measured quality it usually carried into something more open, more undefended. Like a man who had been holding a very heavy thing for a very long time and had just quietly set it down. "Clara," he said. She waited. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the coffee. "Thank you," he said finally. It came out differently than the nightly thank you after dinner. Heavier, like it was carrying more than itself. "You don't need to thank me," she said. "This is the work." "It's not the work I hired you for," he said. "No," she said. "But it's the work that needed doing." He looked at her, and she thought with the clarity that was almost alarming that this was a man who had spent years learning to need nothing from anyone, and who was now standing at the edge of needing something, and who did not yet know what to do with that. She picked up her own coffee. She looked at the window where the sky was turning from gray to the pale washed gold of early morning. "The families," she said. "Saturday. Saturday," he said. Saturday came with a sky full of heat and the sound of wagon wheels on the road before 8 in the morning. 4 families. The Carvers, first Bill Carver, and his wife May, who was 7 months along, and had the particular settled calm of a woman who had made peace with being uncomfortable. Then the Holts, older, quieter, the kind of couple who had been married so long they moved like one body when they sat down. The Pruitts arrived together with Selah Marsh, who had apparently accepted a ride, and spent the journey by Roy Pruitt's muttered account as he helped her down, telling him everything she thought was wrong with modern farming. Clara had set up the kitchen and the front room together, pushed tables, brought chairs from every room, made coffee enough for an army. Lily had been instructed to keep herself occupied in the garden, unless called a directive she had accepted with the tragic dignity of someone profoundly aware they were missing something interesting. Caleb stood at the front of the room when everyone was settled. How was not a man built for speeches? Clara had understood this, so she had told him the night before, "Don't make a speech. Just tell the truth in the same order it happened." He had nodded and said he could do that. He could. He told them about the water rights. He told them about the county filings. He told them about the boundary survey letter. He laid it out the way he'd laid it out for Clara 3 weeks ago, plainly without drama, letting the facts arrange themselves into the shape they were. And the families sat around the room and listened, and Clara watched their faces and saw the moment, the precise moment, when each of them understood that what had happened to them had not been random, had not been their individual bad luck, had been deliberate and orchestrated and aimed. May Carver was the first to speak. "He did this to all of us," she said, quietly, like a woman confirming something she had suspected in her bones but had not let herself say aloud. "Yes," Caleb said. "The Reeds," Bill Carver said. "He drove them out." "Yes." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Sella Marsh said in the crisp tone of a woman who had outlived 4 decades of nonsense, "Well, what are we going to do about it?" Clara stood up then. She had not planned to speak first, but Selah's question had landed in the room like a match struck, and the answer needed to come quickly, or the energy would disperse back into fear. "We document everything," she said. "Every family in this room writes down their account, what happened when it happened, what they were told, what they lost. Dates, names, amounts. Everything." She looked around the room. "I'll help you organize it. Tanner has already sent a formal complaint to the circuit judge's office. When Judge Harlan arrives at the end of August, he will have a federal file with our documentation in it. He cannot ignore a file. He cannot make it disappear." Bill Carver looked at Caleb. "You trust her judgment on this?" Caleb did not hesitate. "Completely," he said. Clara kept her face still, but she felt the word land somewhere in her chest and stay there. "We have 5 weeks," she continued. 5 weeks to build something so thorough and so clear that there is no procedural way for Hargrove to bury it. We are not going to confront him. We are not going to threaten him. We are going to hand a federal judge a documented record of what he has done, and we are going to let the law do what it exists to do." Roy Pruitt said, "And if it doesn't work?" Clara looked at him. "Then we try the next thing," she said. "But it will work, because we are going to do it right." The room was quiet for a moment. Then slowly, people began to nod. That afternoon, while the families were still at the table, writing their accounts with Clara, sitting alongside them, guiding, organizing, asking the precise questions that drew out the specific details that would matter to a judge, Caleb came to stand in the doorway of the kitchen and watched. He stood there for several minutes before anyone noticed him. Clara noticed him first. She did not look up, but she felt him. There was a particular quality to Caleb Whitmore's presence in a room. Something steady, like a plumb line, in the thing you unconsciously calibrated yourself against. She had been aware of it for weeks. She had been telling herself she was not aware of it. When the families finally left that afternoon, fed, documented, and considerably less frightened than they'd arrived, Caleb stood on the porch and shook hands with every one of them. He shook Bill Carver's hand last, and Carver held on an extra beat and said something low that Clara couldn't hear from where she stood. Caleb nodded once. When he turned back toward the house, Clara was in the doorway. "What did he say?" she asked. "He said—" Caleb paused. "He said he was glad I had someone in my corner." Clara looked at him. "Did you correct him?" she asked. Something moved in Caleb's expression, a shift quick and complicated, like weather changing. "No," he said. "I didn't." He walked past her into the house. Clara stood in the doorway for a moment. Her heart was doing it again. She told it nothing this time. It was 4 days later that Hargrove came back. Not with his wife. Not with pleasantries. He rode in on a gray horse with 2 men behind him who did not look like ranch hands, and he did not come to the gate. He came all the way to the porch, and he sat on that horse and looked down at Caleb, the way men look down at things they had already decided they owned. Clara was inside. She heard the horses. She came to the window and looked out. "I know what you're doing, Whitmore," Hargrove said. His voice was still even. He had the control of a man who had spent years learning that showing anger was losing ground. "I know Tanner's been talking to my sellers. I know you've got someone filing paperwork with the federal office." Caleb stood at the bottom of the porch steps. He had his arms at his sides. He was very still. "All right," he said. "I'm going to tell you something as a courtesy," Hargrove said. "Walk away from this. Take whatever she's organized." And there it was, the slight emphasis on she, the particular contempt of a man who could not conceive of a woman being the architect of something that threatened him, and put it aside. "I will make this easy for you. I'll buy you out at a fair price. You can go somewhere else. Start over." "I built this," Caleb said. "I'm not going somewhere else." "Then you are going to have a very difficult winter," Hargrove said. "The survey goes forward. The county review goes forward. And when it's done, you'll have spent everything you have, fighting something you cannot win, and you'll sell anyway. The only thing that changes is what you have left when it's over." Caleb looked up at him. "Hargrove," he said, "you burned Deacon's barn." The words landed like a stone in standing water. Hargrove's face did not change. But one of the men behind him moved just slightly, and that movement told Clara everything. "That's a serious accusation," Hargrove said carefully. "Yes," Caleb said, "it is. You can't prove it." "Probably not today," Caleb said. "But the circuit judge has a long memory and a lot of time, and by the time he's done going through what's been filed, you're going to wish you'd left Deacon's barn standing." He paused. "Get off my land." Hargrove looked at him for a long, calculated moment. Then his eyes moved to the window, to Clara. She did not step back. She looked back at him through the glass, steady and still. "She's going to cost you everything," Hargrove said. Not to Clara, to Caleb, as if she were a weather pattern being discussed in front of her face. "She's the best thing that's happened to this ranch in 10 years, Caleb said, quietly, with an absolute certainty that Clara felt go through her like something bright and cold. "And you don't get to look at her." Hargrove's jaw moved. Then he turned his horse and rode out, his 2 men following. Clara stood at the window. She heard Caleb's boots on the porch steps. She heard the door. She turned away from the window before he came in. "He knows," she said. Her voice was steady. She needed it to be. "Yes," Caleb said. "He's going to try to move against the families before the judge arrives." "Yes," he said. "He will." "Then we need to move faster." She turned to look at him. "We need to get the Deacons back. If they'd left for Kansas less than 3 weeks ago, they haven't gone far." Caleb stared at her. "The Deacons," he said, "if they testify to what happened to their barn." "Then Hargrove isn't just facing a civil property dispute," she said. "He's facing a criminal complaint. That changes everything." She looked at him. "Can you find them?" "I know which road they'd have taken," he said. "How long?" 3 days out. 3 days back if they'll come." "Will they come?" I was quiet for a moment. Daniel Deacon is a man who lost his barn and had to watch his family pack up and leave land. His grandfather broke. He didn't leave because he wanted to. He paused. "He'll come." "Then go," she said. "Tanner can stay with us. Take Roy." He was already moving toward the door. "Caleb." She caught his arm. It was the first time she had touched him. Truly touched him deliberately since she'd arrived. He stopped. He looked down at her hand on his arm. "Be careful." He looked at her face. Something in his expression broke open just for a moment, just long enough for her to see what was underneath all that careful, practiced steadiness. Something real and unguarded and enormous. "I'll be back in 6 days," he said. His voice had gone rough in a way she had not heard before. "I know," she said. She let go of his arm. He walked out the door. The 6 days were the longest of Clara's time on the ranch. Not because she was idle. She wasn't. She spent those days with Tanner, who came and stayed, as promised, going through every document, every account, every date and name, building the file into something watertight. She wrote letters, careful, precise, legal-sounding letters she had never been trained to write, but turned out to have a native aptitude for to accompany the documentation. She drilled Tanner on exactly what the circuit judge's office would need to see first, second, third, but in the margins of all that work in the quiet. After Lily went to sleep in the moments between one task and the next, she was aware of an absence in the house that had a shape, a specific weight, a sound profile she had apparently been cataloging without knowing it right up until it was gone. On the fourth night, Lily came downstairs at 10 o'clock and found Clara still at the kitchen table. "You're not sleeping again," Lily said. "I'm working." Lily sat down across from her uninvited and looked at the papers. "Is Uncle Caleb okay?" she asked. "He's fine. He'll be back in 2 days." Lily was quiet for a moment. "Clara," she said. Do you love my uncle?" Clara set down her pen. She looked at Lily, 8 years old and utterly serious, with her nightgown too big and her braid half unraveled, and her mother's eyes watching Clara with the kind of clear, direct attention that children had before they learned to look sideways at important things. "I respect him very much," Clara said carefully. "That's not what I asked," Lily said. Clara held Lily's gaze for a long moment. "Go to bed, Lily," she said softly. Lily studied her for another moment. Then she got up, walked to the doorway, and said without turning around, "He talks about you when he thinks I'm asleep, just so you know." She went upstairs. Clara sat at the table with her pen in her hand and the lamp burning low and her chest entirely too full of something she did not have a safe place to put. Caleb came back on the evening of the 6th day. He came back with Roy and with a wagon that had not left with them. And in that wagon, with their belongings packed tight and their faces carrying the particular expression of people who have made a hard decision and have stopped second-guessing it, were Daniel Deacon, his wife Ruth, and their 2 sons. Clara was on the porch when they rode in. Caleb dismounted and looked up at her, and he did not say anything, but his face said, "We have them." Daniel Deacon stepped down from the wagon. He was 50-something, and had the look of a man who had been ground down by something larger than himself and was still standing anyway. He looked at Clara. "You the one who put this together," he said. "Several of us," Clara said. "Caleb says you're the one who said to come get us." "He didn't have to come," she said. "He chose to." Deacon looked at Caleb, then back at Clara. "He said you have a plan." "We have the beginning of one," she said. "Come inside, both of you. I'll tell you everything we have." Ruth Deacon, stepping down from the wagon with the help of her eldest son, caught Clara's eye as she passed. She stopped for just a moment. Her hand found Clara's arm. "Thank you," she said. Just those 2 words, low and direct. Clara nodded. She held the door. They were all at the table, Deacon's Tanner, Caleb, Clara, until well past midnight. Deacon's account of the barn was devastating. He had seen the man. He could not prove who had sent him, but he had seen the man had a name from a witness in town, who had seen the same man coming from Hargrove's property the same afternoon. When Clara wrote it all down, and Tanner looked at it, he said with a quiet that was almost reverent, "This is criminal conspiracy. This is not a land dispute anymore." "It never was," Clara said. Caleb sat across from her. He looked at the file she had assembled weeks of work, dozens of pages organized and indexed and cross-referenced in her precise handwriting, and then he looked at her. "Clara," he said. She looked up. "When this is done," he said slowly, "I need to say something to you." The table had gone quiet. Tanner was very interested in his coffee. The Deacons were looking elsewhere with the careful discretion of people who understood a private moment when they stumbled into one. "Say it now," Clara said. Caleb shook his head. "Not now, when this is done." His eyes held hers. "But I need you to know there's something I intend to say." Clara held his gaze. Her heart was loud. "All right," she said. He looked down at the file. "Then let's finish this," he said. They had 2 weeks left before Judge Harlan arrived. Clara knew it the way she knew the state of the flour bin and the height of the creek, and how many pages were left in Lily's arithmetic book, by constant quiet attention to the things that mattered. 14 days. The file was nearly complete. The Deacons were settled in the Whitmore bunkhouse, Daniel's account written out and signed and added to the growing stack of documented evidence that Tanner handled with the reverence of a man who understood exactly what he was holding. But something was wrong. Clara felt it before she could name it. A shift in the texture of ordinary days, small and subtle, like the air pressure dropping before a storm that hadn't shown itself yet. It started on a Monday with Ed Marsh coming in from the north fence line and telling Caleb in a low voice he clearly thought Clara couldn't hear from the kitchen that someone had been on the property. Not the road. The back ridge. Someone had been up on that ridge looking down at the ranch house. She heard it. She said nothing until Ed had gone back out. Then she said, "When?" Caleb turned. He did not look surprised that she'd heard. "Yesterday. Maybe the day before. Ed found boot prints." "Hargrove knows we have the Deacons," she said. "He knows," Caleb said. "Someone in Harlan talked. I don't know who." Clara set down the dish she was drying. She thought for a moment. "He can't stop the filing. It's already in the judge's office. He can't undo the documentation." She looked at Caleb. What can he still do? Caleb's jaw was set. He can go after the witnesses. Not directly, he's too careful for that. But he can make it clear enough that people understand what cooperation costs them. "The Carvers," Clara said immediately. "May is weeks away from her time. He knows they're vulnerable." Caleb was already reaching for his hat. "I'll ride out," he said. "Take Roy," she said. "Don't go alone." He stopped at the door and looked at her, that direct measuring look he'd had from the beginning, except that it had changed somehow in 2 months. It carried something now that it hadn't carried in the beginning. Something that made Clara hold very still when it landed on her. "You'll be all right here," he said. It wasn't a question exactly. More like a man reminding himself of something he needed to believe. "Tanner's coming at noon," she said. "Go." He went. He came back in the late afternoon with Bill Carver alongside him, and from the set of both men's faces, Clara understood before either of them spoke that something had happened. She waited. Bill Carver sat down at the table and put his hands flat on it and said, "Someone came to my place this morning, after Caleb left. 2 men I didn't know. They said they were from the land office." His voice was controlled in the way men's voices went controlled when they were covering something that wanted to come out sideways. "They told my wife while she's 8 months along that we'd filed a fraudulent complaint. That if we didn't withdraw our statement from the record, they'd bring a charge of false filing against me." The kitchen went very quiet. "They threatened her," Clara said. "They sat at my kitchen table and smiled at her and told her that her husband was going to face criminal charges," Bill said. "She didn't tell me until I got home tonight because she didn't want me to do something stupid." He looked up. "She's right that I might have." Clara looked at Caleb. Caleb was looking at the wall, and the look on his face was the specific look of a man holding himself to a standard that was costing him considerably. "He's panicking," Clara said. Caleb looked at her. "Think about it," she said. "He had months to do this quietly, and he didn't because he thought he didn't need to. Now the judge is 2 weeks out, and there's a federal file with 17 documented accounts and a criminal witness in his bunkhouse, and he's sending men to threaten a pregnant woman." She held Caleb's gaze. "Panicking men make mistakes. We just need to make sure his mistake lands where it can be seen." Bill Carver looked at her. "How, those 2 men he sent, did May get a look at them?" "She did. She notices things. I need her to write down exactly what they looked like, what they said, word for word as close as she can remember." Clara stood. "This is not it. We absorb quietly. This goes in the file. This goes to Tanner tonight and into the federal record by morning. Hargrove just threatened a witness in a federal complaint. That is not a land dispute anymore. That is a crime." Bill stared at her. Then he looked at Caleb. "I'll get May's account," Caleb said quietly. "You stay here with Clara. We'll ride back to your place together in an hour." Tanner. When they reached him that night went the color of a man who had just watched someone hand him exactly what he'd needed. "Witness intimidation," he said, "in a federal complaint." He set down the paper. Hargrove just made this considerably easier. "Can it go in the record in time?" Clara asked. "I'll send a rider to the county seat tonight," Tanner said. "It'll be there before Harlan's train arrives." He looked at Clara across the lamp. "You know what this means. When the judge gets here, this isn't just a property hearing anymore. He's going to want to talk to every witness personally, and Hargrove is going to know it." "What will Hargrove do?" Clara asked. Tanner was quiet for a moment. "He's going to try to discredit someone. Find a thread he can pull." He looked at her. "You've been out at Whitmore's ranch for 2 months. You're not from the valley. You organized all of this." He paused carefully. "He's going to come for you, Clara. You're the clearest target." The room was very still. Caleb said quietly, and with an absolute absence of drama, "No, he isn't." Tanner looked at him. "He'll try," Caleb said. "People have tried things before." His eyes moved to Clara. "She's not going anywhere, and neither is what she built. He can come for her all he wants." Clara felt the words settle somewhere in her spine, steady, like a hand at her back. "Let him try," she said. Hargrove moved on a Thursday, not with men this time, with paper. A notice arrived at the ranch by county courier official, sealed informing Clara Bennett that her presence on the Whitmore property was being investigated as part of a broader inquiry into potential fraud related to the federal filing. It did not accuse her directly. It was written precisely to avoid direct accusation while making the implication unmistakable. It cited her as a person of interest in a complaint that had been filed by whom was not stated, alleging that the documentation submitted to the circuit judge's office had been fabricated. Clara read it at the kitchen table while Lily was in the garden and Caleb was in the barn. She read it twice. Then she folded it and held it in both hands and let herself, for exactly the length of one slow breath, feel the full weight of what it would mean if it worked. Her name associated with fraud. Her word against Hargrove's word. 2 months of work dismissed as fabrication by a woman nobody in this county had known before the summer. One breath. Then she unfolded it, stood up, and went to find Caleb. He read it standing up, which was how he read things that mattered on his feet, as if sitting down would slow his response time. His face went through several things in quick succession, and landed on something very controlled and very cold. "He filed a counter-complaint," he said. "Yes." "Against you specifically?" "Yes." "While you have been in my employ and living in my house," he said. His voice was measured in a way that suggested considerable effort. "He's trying to make you look like a woman who came out here for reasons that weren't what she said," Clara finished. "Yes, I know what he's trying to make me look like." Caleb looked at her. His jaw was a hard line. "Clara." "Don't," she said. Not sharply, just firmly. "Don't apologize for something he did. And don't look at me like I might break. I won't break." He was quiet. "What I need from you," she said, "is to think clearly, because here is what's actually true." She held up the notice. "This was filed today. The judge arrives in 12 days. A counter-complaint filed 12 days before a hearing against the person who organized the documentation is not a legitimate legal filing. It's a delay tactic and a discrediting attempt, and Judge Harlan is going to see it as exactly that." She looked at him. "Unless we panic. Unless we let it look like we have something to hide." Caleb held her gaze. "Do you trust me?" she asked. "Completely," he said. The same word he had said to Bill Carver weeks ago in this same kitchen, and it hit her the same way now, clean and weight-bearing and real. "Then here's what we do," she said. "We respond to this notice in writing today. Calmly, professionally. We lay out the timeline of my employment, the terms of the arrangement, and attach a copy of every document I have organized with dates. We show the judge exactly who filed what and when, and we let the record speak." She paused. "He wants me rattled. He wants me to run or lash out or give him something he can use. I'm not going to do either." Caleb looked at the notice in her hand. "He doesn't know you very well," he said. "No," she said. "He doesn't." Something moved in his expression, something that had been building for weeks, she thought, pressing quietly against whatever he'd been holding it back with. "Clara," he said, and his voice had gone low and different. Not the working voice. Not the reporting voice. The other one, the one she'd only heard a handful of times always when something was true, and it cost him something to say it. Not yet, she said quietly. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the notice in her hands. You said when this is done. Let's finish it first. A beat of silence. All right, he said. She went to the desk and started writing. The response went out that afternoon with Tanner's writer. By the following morning, Tanner had sent word back. The judge's clerk had received both the original file and Clara's response to the counter-complaint and had sent a single line back through Tanner's contact. Judge Harlan will hear all parties on arrival. No preliminary rulings. Tanner, relaying this at the kitchen table with his coffee, said, That means he's not dismissing anything before he gets here. Good for us. Means the counter-complaint didn't land the way Hargrove wanted. Clara exhaled slowly. It also means Hargrove gets to be in that room, Caleb said. Yes, Tanner said. He does. Can he bring lawyers? He can, and he will. Tanner looked at Clara. You should know this hearing isn't a trial. It's an evidentiary review. The judge is going to look at what's been filed and determine whether there's sufficient basis for formal proceedings. What we need is for him to see enough to refer the case to the federal court in the capital. He paused. We don't have to win on Thursday. We just have to be credible enough that he can't dismiss it. We're credible, Clara said. You're credible, Tanner said. That's not the same thing as the room treating you that way. She looked at him. You're a woman, he said, not unkindly. You're not from this valley. You've been living on a single man's property for 2 months. Hargrove's lawyer is going to walk in there and try to make the hearing about those 3 facts. Clara was quiet for a moment. Let him, she said. The documents don't have a gender. The dates don't have a gender. The deacon's burned barn doesn't have a gender. She looked at Tanner steadily. If Judge Harlan is the man you say he is, he'll look at the evidence. That's all I need him to do. Tanner studied her. Then he picked up his coffee and said, I've been in this county for 40 years. I have never seen anyone put something like this together in 8 weeks. He paused. Your father doesn't deserve you, but this valley does. Clara said nothing, but something in her chest shifted quietly permanently, the way things shifted when a truth arrived that you had not known you needed. The night before the hearing, she could not sleep. She lay in her room. The spare room that had become her room over 2 months, that she had stopped thinking of as a borrowed space sometime around week 4, and she stared at the ceiling and went through every document in her head, every date, every name, every account. She had read them so many times that she could see them printed against the dark, clear, and exact, and she tested each one against the hardest questions she could construct and found them holding. The file held. She believed that. What she wasn't sure of was the room. Tanner was right. She knew he was right. There would be men in that hearing who looked at her and saw a problem, not a person. Men who would discount her work, not because it was flawed, but because she was the one who had done it. Men who had spent their whole careers operating in spaces that were not built for women and had come to believe genuinely that this was the natural order of things. She had been in rooms like that before. She had never been in one where this much depended on what she said. She was still staring at the ceiling when she heard the knock at her door. Quiet. 2 knocks. She sat up. Yes. It's me, Caleb said. From the other side of the door. He did not open it. I know, she said. I saw the light, he said. Under the door. She looked at the lamp. She had not realized she'd left it burning. Can't sleep, she said. A pause. Me neither. She waited. I just wanted you to know, he said through the closed door with the particular careful quality of a man who had chosen his words slowly, that whatever happens tomorrow, what you've done here, what you built, nobody can take that back. Whatever they say in that room, however they try to frame it. Another pause. You did something real. That's a fact. Facts don't bend for people like Hargrove. Clara sat in the lamp glow and felt the words move through her like something warm and steady. Thank you, she said. "Get some sleep," he said, gently. "You too," she said. She heard him move away from the door. She heard his boots on the stairs. She turned down the lamp. She slept. Judge Harlan arrived on Thursday morning on the 9 o'clock train from the Capitol, and by 10, he was seated at the head of the long table in the county assembly room, with his reading glasses on and the federal file open in front of him, and Clara understood within 30 seconds of being in the room that Tanner had been right about him. He was 70 years old and had the face of a man who had spent 4 decades being lied to by people who thought themselves very clever and had grown entirely peacefully impartially tired of it. He read the file the way she had organized it front to back in order without skipping. He asked one clarifying question of Tanner's contact at the federal office. He made 2 notes in his own hand. Then he looked up at the room. Hargrove was there with 2 lawyers' men from the Capitol, expensive and smooth, with the polished ease of people accustomed to making complexity work in their client's favor. They had arranged themselves on one side of the room. On the other side sat Tanner, Caleb, Clara, and behind them the families. All of them. Carver's Holtz, Pruitt's, Selah Marsh in her good black dress, and the deacon's Daniel, sitting straight-backed with his arms crossed, and his face like a man who had driven several days to say something and intended to say it. Hargrove's lead lawyer stood first. He was tall and silver-haired and spoke in the measured cadences of someone trained to make obvious things sound complicated. He said the filing was procedurally irregular. He said the documentation had been assembled by an individual with no legal standing in the county. He said the so-called witness accounts were organized by a woman with a personal financial connection to the primary complainant, which constituted a conflict of interest that should render the entire file suspect. He said Clara Bennett's name 3 times. Each time he said it, he made it sound like a problem. Judge Harlan listened to all of it without expression. When the lawyer finished, the judge looked directly at Clara. "Miss Bennett," he said, "you organized this file." "Yes, sir," she said. "Tell me how." "So," she told him. She stood up. Caleb made a small movement beside her, not reaching out, just present, and she told Judge Harlan in plain and precise language exactly how the file had been assembled. The sequence, the sourcing, the dates, the cross-references, the reason each piece of documentation supported the next. She spoke for 11 minutes. She did not look at Hargrove's lawyers. She looked at the judge. When she was done, he said, "You're not a lawyer." "No, sir. Where did you learn to do this?" Clara paused. "I learned to read carefully," she said. "And I learned to believe what the facts said, instead of what people told me the facts said." Harlan studied her over his glasses for a long moment. Then he said, "I have a few questions for Mr. Hargrove." What happened next took 40 minutes and felt like watching something inevitable arrive. The judge asked Hargrove about the water rights filing. He asked about the specific dates. He held up Tanner's copy, the one that should have matched the county record, and he asked Hargrove to explain the discrepancy between the date on the filing and the date on the county clerk's receipt stamp. Hargrove's lawyer objected. Twice. Both times Harlan overruled him with the patient finality of a man removing obstacles from his path. Hargrove himself said the discrepancy was a clerical error. 3 separate dates on 3 separate documents, the judge said, all involving the same filing, all different. That's a great many clerical errors, Mr. Hargrove. Hargrove's face was a study in controlled pressure, a man holding something together by force of habit. Then Daniel Deacon stood up. He had not been invited to speak yet. He stood up anyway, and there was something in the way he stood the size of his stillness. The weight of a man who had lost his barn and his land, and driven back across 2 states to say what he knew that made the room go quiet before he even opened his mouth. "I saw the man who set my fire," Daniel said. "His name is Pete Colvin. He works for Hargrove's mill. I've got a witness who saw him leave Hargrove's property 2 hours before the fire started." He looked directly at Hargrove across the room. "I came back to say that. I want it in the record." The room was absolutely silent. Hargrove looked at Daniel Deacon. And for the first time since Clara had been in the same space as Fletcher Hargrove, she watched him not know what to do with his face.
"Chance."
Judge Harlan called a brief recess. In the hallway, Caleb stood beside Clara and said nothing for a moment. Then he said quietly, "He's done." "Not officially," she said. "Not yet." "He's done," Caleb said again. "Certain." Tanner appeared at her other elbow. "Harlan's going to refer this to the federal court in the capital. Criminal proceedings for the arson, civil proceedings for the water rights fraud, and the witness intimidation." He looked at Clara. "Your file is going to be entered as the primary evidence record." Clara looked at the floor. She felt something move through her. Not triumph exactly. Quieter than that. The particular feeling of a thing that had been wrong for a long time becoming slowly correctable. "The families," she said. "What happens to the families? The land sales he pressured them into, those are going to be reviewed. It'll take time, but the legal footing is solid." Tanner paused. "Some of them may get their land back." Clara thought about May Carver at her kitchen table, her hands shaking after two men had sat across from her and smiled. She thought about Selah Marsh in her good black dress in the back of the room, her chin raised like a woman who had been waiting for someone to finally ask for her testimony. She thought about the Reeds who had gone to Kansas and might not know yet that something was changing. "Someone needs to reach the Reeds," she said. Tanner looked at her. "I'll find them." "Good," she said. Caleb's hand found the small of her back, brief, barely there, the gentlest possible weight. She did not move away. When they reconvened, Judge Harlan spoke for exactly 6 minutes. He said the file submitted by the residents of the Northeast Valley represented in his professional assessment one of the most meticulously documented cases of coordinated property fraud he had encountered in 4 decades on the federal circuit. He said the criminal complaint regarding the Deacon fire would be referred to the U.S. Marshal's office by end of week. He said the civil proceedings regarding the water rights and the pressured land sales would be heard in the capital within 60 days. He said Fletcher Hargrove and his representatives were to consider themselves under the court's notice pending formal summons. And then he said, without looking up from his papers, "The individual responsible for the organization of this evidentiary file has done a considerable service to this court and to the residents of this valley. That service is noted in the record." Clara did not look at Hargrove. She looked at her hands in her lap. She felt Caleb go very still beside her. And she thought about a girl who had ridden 48 miles across summer heat to deliver an apology that wasn't hers, who had not come looking for anything beyond the edge of one hard thing, and who had somehow ended up here in a county assembly room, with a federal judge's words settling into the official record like something that could not be taken back. Behind her, she heard Selah Marsh say in a carrying whisper that she made no effort to contain, "Well, it's about time." A small, involuntary sound escaped Clara. Caleb heard it. He turned to look at her, and when he saw the expression on her face, the thing that had broken through the composure quiet and bright and real. Something happened in his face in return that she had never seen there before. Open, unguarded, certain. He reached over and took her hand. Not tentatively. Not the way a man reaches for something he's asking permission for. The way a man reaches for something he intends to keep. Clara looked down at their joined hands. Then she looked at him. "You said you had something to tell me," she said, quietly under the noise of the room coming back to life around them. "I do," he said. "The 3 months are almost up," she said. "I know," he said. "That's what I need to talk to you about." His thumb moved across her knuckles. "I need to ask you something." "Ask?" she said. He looked at her. All that steadiness, all that care, all of it present and accountable and entirely completely directed at her. "Stay," he said. One word. The room around them went somewhere else entirely. Clara held his gaze. Her heart was doing what it had been doing for 8 weeks, and this time she did not tell it to stop. Stay. One word. The simplest word in the English language. The word a person said to a dog, to a child, to anyone they did not want to walk away from them. And yet sitting in that county assembly room, with the noise of people rising around them, and Caleb Whitmore's hand wrapped around hers, Clara felt it land with the weight of something that had taken the entire summer to become possible. She did not answer immediately, not because she didn't know the answer. She had known the answer she suspected for longer than she was willing to admit to herself. She didn't answer because the answer was large enough that it deserved more than the tail end of a federal hearing with Tanner 3 feet away, pretending to organize papers, and Sella Marsh watching them with the undisguised interest of a woman who had earned the right to be nosy. "Tonight," she said. "Ask me tonight." Caleb looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once and let go of her hand and stood to shake Tanner's hand as the room continued its slow dissolution around them. Clara sat still for a moment longer. Her hand felt the absence of his immediately. She told herself that was information, not a decision. Then she stood up because there was still work to do, and Clara Bennett had never in her life left work sitting on the table. The ride back to the ranch was quiet in the way that held things rather than lacking them, 4 people on horses and 1 wagon. The late afternoon pressing gold and heavy over the hills. Everyone carrying the particular stillness of people who have been through something that will take time to fully understand. Lily had been left in Ruth Deacon's care, and when they came through the gate, she was sitting on the porch steps with a book she had clearly not been reading, and she stood up the moment she saw them and looked at Clara's face with the particular acuity of a child who had learned to read rooms before she'd learned to read words. "Did it work?" she asked. "It worked," Clara said. Lily threw both arms around her waist with a force that drove the air out of Clara's lungs, and Clara held her and felt the child's relief moving through her in waves. The relief of someone who had been quietly terribly frightened for weeks and had not said so because the adults around her were frightened too, and she had not wanted to add to it. "Hey," Clara said into the top of Lily's head. "Hey, it's all right." "I know," Lily said, muffled against Clara's coat. "I knew it would be. I needed it to actually be." Over Lily's head, Clara looked at Caleb. I was watching them from 3 feet away, with that open, unguarded expression she had seen for the first time in the assembly room, the one that had no armor in it. He did not look away when she met his eyes. "Go help Ruth with dinner," he told Lily. "Give Clara a minute." Lily pulled back, assessed the situation with the rapid-fire competence of a child who understood subtext, and went inside with a dignity that suggested she was choosing to cooperate rather than being redirected. The porch was quiet. Clara looked at Caleb. "You said tonight," he said. "It's not tonight yet," she said. "Close enough." She almost smiled. "You're not patient." "I'm extremely patient," he said. "I have been patient for 2 months. I'm done." She looked at him. He was standing at the bottom of the porch steps, which put them nearly at eye level, and he was looking at her with the same directness he brought to everything. No performance, no hedging. Just Caleb Whitmore telling the truth in the only way he knew how. "I don't want you to stay because the 3 months are up," he said. "I don't want you to stay because Lily needs you, though she does. I don't want you to stay out of obligation or convenience, or because your father still owes me money, which he does." He paused. "I want you to stay because I want you here. Because this house is different with you in it, and I don't want it to go back to what it was." He stopped, looked at his boots for a moment, then looked back at her. "I'm not good at this. I know that." "You're doing fine," she said quietly. "Clara." "Caleb." "Stay," he said. "Please." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about 48 miles of summer road, and a letter in her coat pocket, and a man who had turned from a gatepost and looked at her like something unexpected. She thought about biscuits and burned bottoms, and a sunflower that grew the way it was going to grow. She thought about Lily's grief and Caleb's silence, and the particular shape of a man learning to set something heavy down. "I'm not staying because you asked me to," she said. Something flickered in his expression. "I'm staying," she said, "because this is where I want to be. That's different. That's mine." She held his gaze. "I need you to understand that difference. I'm not here because I was sent here. I'm not here because I owe anyone anything. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing to stay." Caleb looked at her. The whole weight of the summer was in that look every morning at the table, every evening on the porch, every document and late lamp and hand on her arm, before he rode into the dark. "I understand the difference," he said. "I do." "Good," she said. She came down 1 step so they were on the same level. Then yes, she said. I'll stay. What came after was not simple, because nothing real ever was. There was still her father to think about, George Bennett, sitting in Harlan with his cold coffee and his inability to look certain things in the face. Clara rode down to see him the following week alone, and she sat across from him at the same table where the Whitmore letter had sat for 11 days, and she told him what had happened. The hearing, the judge, the file, the outcome. He listened with his hands around his cup and his eyes on the table for most of it. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You did all that," he said. "We did all of it," she said. "Caleb, Tanner, the families." "You organized it," he said. "Tanner told me. He came by last week." He paused. "He said you were the one who held it together." Clara said nothing. "I should have gone myself," her father said. "To Whitmore, back in June. I should have gone myself." "Yes," she said. "You should have." The word landed the same way it always did, clean and with an edge and true. Her father looked up at her. His eyes were tired in the way of a man who had spent a long time running from a reckoning and had finally run out of road. "Are you happy out there?" he asked. Clara thought about the question carefully because he deserved a careful answer. "I'm something better than happy," she said. "I'm where I belong." Her father looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Is he good to you?" "He's honest with me," she said. "Which is better?" Her father nodded slowly. He looked at his cup. "I'd like to come out," he said. If you'd allow it. I'd like to look the man in the eye and say what I should have said before I sent my daughter to say it for me." Clara looked at him. "Next Sunday," she said. "Come for dinner." He came. He sat across from Caleb at the table, and he said what he needed to say, haltingly, imperfectly, with the particular anguish of a man who had spent 60 years being better at intentions than outcomes. Caleb listened. He did not make it easy, but he did not make it cruel. When it was done, he said, "I know you love her, Mr. Bennett. I'm going to take care of her." And then, because he was Caleb, and not given to softening things unnecessarily, he added, "She doesn't need taking care of, but I'm going to be here." George Bennett looked at his daughter. Clara was looking at Caleb. Her father understood everything there was to understand. The first letter arrived from the federal court in the capital 3 weeks after the hearing. Hargrove had been formally served. The U.S. Marshal's Office had identified Pete Colvin, who had, upon being located in a town 2 counties over, demonstrated the particular willingness to talk that men demonstrated when they understood the alternative. Colvin gave a full account. He named Hargrove. He named 2 other incidents beyond the Deacon fire that no one had known about. Tanner read Clara the relevant portions when he came out on a Wednesday. She sat at the kitchen table and read them twice the same way she read everything that mattered. "The Reeds," she said. "Have you reached them?" "Ryder found them outside Salinas 3 days ago," Tanner said. "They're coming back." Clara set the letter down. "The land," she said. "Will it be restored?" "The court's reviewing the sale as coerced," Tanner said. "Given Colvin's testimony and the pattern of intimidation, it's looking likely." He paused. "It won't be fast, but it'll happen." Clara looked at the window. She thought about the Reeds packing their wagon in the dark. She thought about Daniel Deacon watching his barn burn and not being able to prove who had done it. She thought about May Carver, 8 months along, sitting across from 2 men who smiled at her and threatened everything she had. "Good," she said. It was not enough of a word for what she felt, but it was the only one that fit. The change in the valley came slowly. The way good things came, not in a single dramatic gesture, but in accumulation. The Deacons stayed on in the bunkhouse through September, and then Caleb helped Daniel Deacon file the legal paperwork to challenge the coerced sale, and Tanner provided the supporting documentation, and the wheels of the federal court turned in the slow and grinding way of large mechanisms, but they turned. The Carver's baby came in early September, a girl, as it turned out, healthy and loud. May sent word to the ranch with Roy Marsh, and Lily received the news with the seriousness of someone filing it away for future reference, and then asked Clara if they could go see the baby, and Clara said yes, and they went. And Clara held the baby, while May looked at her with the expression of a woman who had been through something hard, and had come out the other side knowing exactly who had been worth knowing. "I want to name her Clara," May said. "If that's all right?" Clara looked down at the baby in her arms. "That's more than all right," she said. She did not say anything else because the baby was very small and warm, and Clara's throat had done something inconvenient, and she preferred to handle it quietly. It was Lily who forced the conversation they had been circling. She did it in October on a Sunday morning with the particular frontal approach of someone who had decided that the adults in her life had been dancing around something long enough. She came downstairs while Caleb and Clara were both in the kitchen. Caleb with his coffee, Clara with the week's accounts, and she stood in the doorway and said with enormous casualness, "Are you two going to get married or not?" The kitchen went very quiet. Caleb set down his cup. Clara kept her eyes on the accounts for precisely 1 second longer than was defensible, and then looked up. Lily was watching them both with the alert, interested expression of someone who had asked a reasonable question and was prepared to wait for a reasonable answer. "Lily," Caleb said. "What?" Lily said. "That's not—" He stopped. "I've been waiting since August," Lily said reasonably. "I'm patient, but I'm 8. Clara pressed her lips together. "Go feed Captain," Caleb said. "Captain doesn't need feeding right now," Lily said. "It's too early." "Lily." "I'm just saying," Lily said with perfect equanimity, "that I would very much like it if Clara stayed. Not 3 months, not a year, just stayed." She looked at Clara. "And I think Uncle Caleb would like that too, but he's taking a very long time to say it properly." She turned and went outside. The door swung shut behind her. The kitchen was silent. Clara looked at the accounts. "She's not wrong," Caleb said. Clara looked up. He was standing on the other side of the table, and he had the look of a man who had been waiting for an opening and had just watched an 8-year-old kick the door down for him. "I know she's not," Clara said. He came around the table. "Not fast." Nothing about Caleb Whitmore was fast, but purposeful, the way he did everything that mattered. He stopped in front of her and looked at her, and she looked back at him, and the morning light was coming through the window, and the coffee was getting cold, and somewhere outside, Captain was definitely not in need of early feeding. "I don't have a speech," he said. "I know," she said. "I have a ring," he said. "It was my mother's. I've had it in the deed box for 10 years. He paused. "I took it out last week." Clara went very still. "Last week," she said. "The week before, actually," he said. "I've been carrying it around." He reached into his shirt pocket and opened his hand. It was simple, a narrow gold band with a small oval stone, the kind of ring a working woman would wear and not worry about. The kind of ring that said, "I know who you are," without needing to be anything more than honest. Clara looked at it. "Caleb," she said. "I know what I'm asking," he said. "I know it's not a small thing. I know you chose to come back in September, and that was your choice, and this is a different choice, and you don't owe me—" "Caleb," she said again. He stopped. "I have been ready to say yes since September," she said. "I was waiting for you to ask." He looked at her. "You could have told me that," he said. "You could have asked sooner," she said. Something crossed his face. Exasperation and tenderness, and something so warm it was almost difficult to look at directly. "Clara Bennett," he said, "will you marry me?" "Yes," she said. "Caleb Whitmore, I will." He put the ring on her finger. It fit. She thought of course it fits. Lily's reaction when informed was a single loud sound of vindication, followed by an immediate inquiry into whether she could be the one to tell Tanner, because she explained a bet with herself about whether he would cry. "You can tell him," Clara said. "Does this mean you're my aunt?" Lily asked. Clara looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Clara. "Yes," Clara said. "That's what it means." Lily considered this with the gravity it deserved. "I've never had an aunt before," she said. "I've never been one," Clara said. "I think you'll be good at it," Lily said, and went to find her coat because telling Tanner was clearly a priority that could not wait. The wedding was in November in the valley with the families. Tanner did cry. Lily was gratified. May Carver brought the baby Clara, who slept through the ceremony with the tranquil indifference of someone who would understand the significance later. Bill Carver shook Caleb's hand for a long time and didn't say much, which was its own kind of eloquence. Sella Marsh wore her good black dress again and said upon being informed that Clara had organized the entire ceremony herself in 3 weeks. Of course she did. Daniel Deacon arrived with Ruth and their boys, and before the ceremony, he took Clara aside and said quietly, "I got a letter from the federal court yesterday. They're returning the land." His voice was level, but his eyes were not. "I wanted you to know before you got married, before the day got busy." He paused. "I wanted to tell you myself." Clara held his gaze. "How do you feel?" she asked. He looked at the hills, at the valley spread below, at the particular quality of light that belonged to this place in November, low and clear and final. "Like I never should have left," he said, "and like I'm glad I came back." "Me too," Clara said. He nodded once. She nodded once. They went back to the wedding. George Bennett walked his daughter to where Caleb was standing. He did not make a speech. He was not a man who could have made a speech without losing his composure, and he knew it, and he had accepted it. What he did was take Clara's hand and hold it for a moment, and look at her with all the complexity of a man who loved his daughter completely, and had failed her in specific and undeniable ways, and had spent the last several months trying to reckon with both of those things being true simultaneously. "You should have been the one to go," Clara said quietly. "Just for him." "I know," he said. "But I'm glad I did," she said. "So we'll call it even." Her father looked at her. And then he did something she had not seen him do since she was 12 years old. He pulled her close and held on, and she let him, because he was her father, and she loved him, and those two things were enough, and had always been enough even when they weren't simple. He put her hand in Caleb's hand. Caleb held it the way he always held things, with complete attention, like it was the most important thing in the room, because it was. They said their vows simply the way Caleb did everything that mattered, plainly, without theater, with total intention. The man who had officiated rode out from Harlan and stood before them and asked the standard questions and got 2 clear answers from 2 people who had spent an entire summer learning exactly what they were agreeing to. When it was done, Caleb looked at her with that open, unguarded face she had come to understand was his truest one, the one that cost him something to show, and that he showed her anyway. "All right," he said, like the beginning of something. "All right," she said back. Lily from 3 feet away said, "That's it. That's what you say." "Lily." Clara and Caleb said simultaneously. "Just checking," Lily said. That evening, when everyone had gone, and the house was quiet, and Lily was finally reluctantly asleep, Clara stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the dark valley and felt the particular quality of a life that had found its shape. She had not come looking for this. She had come with her back straight and her jaw set and a letter in her coat pocket that wasn't even her apology to give. She had come because someone had to and her father couldn't, and she had never in her life been able to leave a thing undone. She had not come looking for a home. She had not come looking for Caleb Whitmore, or Lily, or the families of the Northeast Valley, or a federal file that would take 2 years to fully resolve. But that was already piece by piece correcting something that had been wrong. She had not come looking for herself either, but she had found all of it. Caleb came and stood beside her at the window. He did not say anything immediately. He just stood there, the way he stood, present, plumb-line steady, the gravity around which she had quietly organized herself without noticing it was happening. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking," she said slowly, "about 48 miles. He looked at her. "If you had written back to that letter," she said. "If my father had responded in the first week. If he had managed to be the kind of man who could face his own mistakes." She paused. "I never would have come. And I never would have—" She stopped. She looked down at the ring on her hand. "All of it. I never would have had any of it." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Your father not writing back," he said, "is the worst thing he ever did, and the best thing that ever happened to me." Clara turned to look at him. "Don't tell him that," she said. "Never," he said. She looked at this man who had turned from a gatepost and assessed her without drama, who had put biscuits on the table and said, "Eat something," like it was the only reasonable response to a person who had ridden 48 miles into uncertainty, who had sat on a porch in the dark, thinking about things he hadn't solved yet, until she had come along and helped him find the door. "I'm glad I came," she said. "I'm glad you stayed," he said. She looked back at the window, at the dark valley and the mountain shapes against the sky, and the particular quality of August stars. She had been watching from this window for months, first as a temporary resident, and then as something else entirely, and now as the woman who lived here, who had chosen to live here. "I didn't get rescued," she said, quietly, to the window as much as to him. "No," he said. "You didn't. I just found a door," she said, "the way I always do." His hand found hers on the windowsill. He held it. "You found a whole valley," he said. She leaned her shoulder against his. Outside the mountains held the dark, the way they held everything steady, immovable, older than any trouble that had ever come against them. Inside the lamp was burning low, and Clara Whitmore, who had ridden out on a summer morning carrying someone else's shame, and had come home carrying something entirely her own, stood in her kitchen in the mountains of Montana, and knew with the same clarity she brought to everything that mattered, that this was not the end of a hard season. This was the first day of the life she had built herself, and she had built it well.